Hello again. We're continuing with reasoning and argumentation, and tonight we're dealing with action, reasoning in action. And the problem that we have all the time in this course is to keep it concrete. The very first night I talked about a definition of reason. Reasoning is going from premises to conclusions. Reasoning in action, you might start listening to me the same way as you would listen to what is called an abstract lecture. I'll get down to the question of abstract later. Reasoning in action is something that we live, and that's the stress I want to put on it tonight. And I want to make it concrete by bringing in people in action. So I'm starting with the end of a very strange book. Not only because it's the end of a magnificent day of action, the book Ulysses, James Joyce, a book written about June 16, 1904, one day. And the book ends with Molly in bed. Now it's not only because of that, because Molly in bed keeps saying yes. It's a yes to life. And our main topic tonight is, what's the meaning of yes? Molly's in bed, and Leopold is in bed, her husband, and he's lying with his feet on the pillow, and Molly talks for 40 pages. It's probably the longest soliloquy in literature. And she ends up, I'll just read the last few lines, and then I asked him with my eyes to ask again, yes. And then he asked me, would I yes, to say yes, my mountain flower. And first I put my arms around him, yes, and drew him down to me, so he could feel my breasts, all perfume, yes, and his heart was going like mad, and yes, I said yes, I will, yes. That's the end of the book Ulysses. And in the text process, you'll find that the pages 34 to 37 talk about Molly and give indications of her speech, a very abbreviated version, so as to invite you to think concretely. Now, hearing from some of you, and I have heard from a few of you, but not enough of you, I'm still waiting for lovely photographs from some of you, and your life story. I really do like that, because knowing the background of the students is a help. I've already had correspondence with some of you. I find that I'm talking to some teachers, and they're getting great fun out of the puzzles. Some people writing to me say that this is very hard work. One person said, I'm finding this book desperately difficult, but isn't that the point? Which is terrific. That is the point. That this is difficult. The problem is not to trivialize ourselves. We are not obvious. Why should you expect a course about us and God to be easy? Remember what I said the first day? It's a peek at a peak. Okay? Now, some of you are worrying about the exam. Great. No. The exam, it's going to focus in on the simplest elements, really the elements. What is knowing? What is doing? What are the elements in doing? What are the elements as they operate in the doing called believing? What is the difference when that believing is in the invisible, the beyond? To specify it in terms of tonight's talk, tonight I'm going to have, I hear somebody sighing with relief, only 4 points. Stop sighing with relief, because there are 14 sub-points. I might as well put them on the blackboard. Okay. The first point, I thought up neat titles for these in order to get us to think, to broaden our perspective. Okay, so the first topic is Emma in the land of Nod. Second topic is nod data. The third topic is all my eye. Many of you have heard the phrase, it's all my eye. No? That's an Irishism, is it? Terrible, isn't it? We have this lack of a common language. In Ireland, if somebody tells you a tall story, you may say, oh, listen, that's all me eye. That's all codology. Is codology a no? What do you say in Canada? It's all BS? Something like that, yes? Okay, barnyard material. All my eye. And the fourth point is finding the way that, all right, yes, that's it. Finding the way that I'm me. That's not good English, is it? But you, pardon? Exactly, yeah. It does. Okay, finding the way that I'm me. Well, the advantage of this is that that's Emma backwards. Okay. Now, the land of Nod, we're going to talk an awful lot about that activity. Okay? And that's what this is about. Here I'm going to talk about the 13 elements. I'm going to focus on 7 elements in these 2. And I hope I don't see people writing eagerly here. Here is where I'll be talking about the puzzles, the sort of thing that leads to an examination of little elements. Okay? We will do some of the puzzles here that some of you have written in about, and it's really marvelous to get your reactions. One person told me that they woke up at 2 in the morning having solved the ABC puzzle. Another person told me that what really held them up was the puzzle about the 7 men digging the hole and how long it takes to dig half a hole. Okay, so at this stage we will do some of the puzzles in section 2.5 of the text. We'll do the puzzles possibly point 4, point 6, point 7, and point 2. Well, we may not. Okay, let's get back to Emma in the land of Nod. But yeah, before going on, is that clear that the exercises are here? We're trying to discover ourselves in an elementary fashion. But I want to also show you the relevance of this. It has an enormous relevance. And that's why I bring in these other areas. Some of you are able to follow them up. There are a few people only doing 1 credit. Now that's marvelous. Then you can actually do it seriously. There are those of you doing 5 credits, I don't know how you do it. Okay, so this is context. And we'll find that the context I'm throwing up at the beginning somehow is the context in which we have to talk about this. A few people were puzzled. One professor of religion was surprised turning this on to find that I was drawing diagrams and doing mathematical puzzles. I mean, this is about religion, you know. It can't be about this other thing. Reasoning is what human beings do, and one of the problems about philosophy of religion and theology is that it has backed off from knowing anything about reason as it happens in the marketplace, in the economy, in the institutions of government, and so on, so that it can become almost irrelevant. And I don't want that impression to emerge out of our superficial half credit. Again, people have asked me, how far in the text should I be now? One person is halfway through both texts. Oh my God, that's really galloping. We're in chapter 1 of the book process, section 2 tonight. And next week we'll be in section 3. In wealth, we're in chapter 2 here. And next week we will be in chapter 7. And this combines wealth, chapter 2 and chapter 6. Now, I could get lost on the connections that I have in my head regarding this talk, but I will mention Genesis chapter 4, verse 16. I was reading a book on Genesis during the week, and the title of the chapter on chapter 4 is Murder Inaugurated. And I want you to keep that in mind. Murder inaugurated. That it's not just Cain killing Abel. There's some way in which we are, as a human group, killing ourselves off. But at the end, I want to show you I'm an optimist. I'm a long-term optimist. And it's very important to notice the long term. Some of my teacher audience have noticed that, yeah, this memorizing is killing, and what to do. You can't do very much. You're in the system. That's what works. You've got to get these kids through the exams. But one hopes in the long term that we will discover that human beings are not the sort of things that fit into the structures of the 20th century. Okay, so in Genesis 4:16, you'll find that it reads, Cain left the presence of Yahweh and went into the land of Nod, east of Eden. You may recall Steinbeck's novel, East of Eden. Cain, in fact, is the Hebrew for yes, not the same word, but the same sound. And yes somehow goes into the land of Nod, will be our topic here. Okay, let's get back to Emma in the land of Nod. Who am I talking about? I'm talking about fictional women, basically, but they're a tremendous help. We're talking now of action. What do I mean? I don't mean a simple analysis of the elements. I mean what we do day in, day out. Here I use Emma. It also fits in with this odd notion, and if you like, if you look up the Hebrew, you'll find Emmanuel relates to this too, and also in Hebrew that is with what? The Hebrew for what is ma. And somehow that's us, with what? In the text you'll find in chapter 1 that I talk about, what is the essence of being human? Okay? Now, just think of that phrase. You've read it in the text perhaps. What is the essence of being human? Now, if you said that to me, have any of you got that question? What is it to be human? Come on, do you? Yeah? Anyone? It's the question behind this course. Yeah? And maybe I'll make you have it eventually. What is the essence of being human? You make that statement to me, and what do I say? Yes! Now, do you get the twist? What is it to be human? Oh, yeah. Yeah. What? What are humans? They're whaters. Yeah? What? A yearning, a loneliness, a longing, an anticipation. We've used all these different words. We're a yearning for the peak. I talked about St. Augustine's desire of the heart. And the problem we've been dealing with, and we'll continue to come back to it, is that such is our culture that that whatting is killed off even by religion. Your desires, how many of you feel your desires bursting in church? Huh? When I was in Toronto, I used to go to church on Sundays, to a Portuguese church, because I didn't know what the guy was saying. It was marvelous. And you heard that you heard this mixture of sort of Spanish and Arabic, and the people were very lively too. If you find these Southern European churches, they're lively affairs. Okay, so what is it to be human? Yeah. Okay. So Emma in the land of Nod. What happens when Emma says yes? Now, I'm not going to get lost in a discussion of Emma, either Emma Woodhouse, that's Jane Austen's Emma, or Emma Bovary, the Emma of Gustave Flaubert. But to make it concrete, perhaps I should recall what to me is the great paragraph in Flaubert's novel. Emma is married to Charles, a doctor. And Emma is sitting at dinner with Charles, a white tablecloth, a beef stew in front of them, and nothing happening between them. And Flaubert describes in a paragraph the terribleness of this. All the misery of her life swells up, floats up from the smell of the beef stew. And she nibbles on a nut, and she picks up her fork, and she draws lines on the tablecloth. And it's a terrible image of two people in the same place. And you find that Emma's desires carry her into strange ways. And you find the same thing in the Emma of Jane Austen, but I won't get into that. Okay, what we're interested then is in Emma's elements, okay? And we'll take illustrations. Emma on the beach, Emma in the kitchen, homely instances. Let's start with Emma on the beach. Emma's a little girl. Okay. Let's imagine that you actually take Emma out, say she's 5-year-old, you bring her out to the beach for a day. And it's a lovely summer's day, and you lie down there and you're suntanning. And you're out of it. Many of you have had this experience. You're having a great time, and you're almost asleep. Yeah? Am I recalling an experience? Yeah? And you're in charge of Emma, but you know, oh God, I hope she's all right. So there you are, and your senses, yes, you're sensible, you feel there's sort of a slight murmur of the sea, and you feel the suntan lotion bubbling on your skin. Yeah? You're not totally out of it. Is that okay? And then all of a sudden you hear and something happens to you, which I note as that. Okay? Normal experience. Yeah? And you may be so sleepy that nothing else happens to you. You just hum. Or you may get the bright idea, it could be Emma. Could be a seagull. And you're sort of alert, and and it stops, and you're just, you're out of it almost. But you rise, literally you rise to the occasion. Well, is it? That question mark really means, is it? Is it Emma? Now, we're trying to identify, like we did last week, identify something that we do spontaneously, immediately, all day long, and I add in the word generally badly. Okay. Is it Emma? Well, you bestir yourself and, you know, your head's back on the sandwich. You look down and, yes, there's an insight. Because you notice a little hand under the water. It's Emma. Or it was Emma. It's Emma. Yes. And that's what we're going to focus on very much down here. Yes, it's Emma. And what happens next? Immediately, yeah?
Back to what you were
You get up to rescue her, maybe. Maybe you've insured her. Yeah, you lie back. Been waiting for this for weeks. Okay. What happens next is not that you run to rescue her, but more of this. Now, what you have to think out is, this can't be serious. What really happens, and again, be honest with yourselves, you want to say, what really happens is, I hear the noise and I run. Isn't that fair enough? Yeah? I mean, this seems crazy, doesn't it? I'm suggesting that you do this. Now, you're not supposed to believe me. Okay? Noise. What might it be? Emma, seagull. Check it out. It's Emma. What am I going to do? All sorts of possibilities occur to you. Shout for help. You can't swim. No point in running down the beach. Look around for the lifeguard. And you might combine these possibilities. And at some stage, you got to say, am I going to do it? Now, I'm wrong in saying that you've got to do that. No, some people get stuck. And many of you have got stuck. You're petrified is the phrase, yeah? There was a knock on your door and you're just going to open the door and a hatchet comes through the wood. Yeah? And you're petrified. The standard stereotype woman in one of these, you know, pugilistic, say her man is fighting against the monster, and the stereotype woman is petrified. Well, you wouldn't do a thing like that, would you? You'd get up and beat the fellow on the head, wouldn't you? Maybe. Okay, so if you're not petrified, you go all the way up. Am I going to? Yeah. And there's a judgment of action. And it may be a lot of actions. You're running. You're shouting for the lifeguard. You're waving to somebody on the beach. And this is sort of human foolishness. Emma's under the water, but you're shouting, Emma, Emma, Emma. It's pretty pointless. You shout for somebody else, but Emma can't hear you. And many of you have done something like that. Okay. Now we're identifying these 13 elements, and we did it last week to some extent. We stopped here. It's easy to count the 13. Sensibility. There are three on each of these levels. Now I'm calling them levels, and technically they're called levels of consciousness. Of awareness, of self-awareness. And you're more alive when you're going up through these. If you're lying asleep on the beach, well, you're not worth talking to because you're not on a sufficient level of consciousness. You know that, say, from being in lectures where you're tired out. You come out to a night lecture and you've been working all day and you had a heavy meal before you got to the lecture. And you sit down at the lecture and then you droop. You get into the land of Nod. Many of you have had that experience. Or you're in church, and everyone thinks you're meditating on the holy name. Okay, so these are levels of consciousness, of alertness. You're more alive. And insofar as you're doing this well, you're more alive. Now, there's a problem that people have with these boxes. And I want to talk about it just in one instance here. When you get an insight, I mentioned on the last day, when you get an insight, you jump to a conclusion, okay? Such is our English language that you're advised not to jump to conclusions. There isn't any other way of getting there, okay? How many of you have been advised not to jump to conclusions? Yeah? How else do you get there? The conclusion of a joke, what happens? You jump, okay? Now, okay, let me take a very simple instance, just on the level of puzzle and understanding related to our puzzles here. It helps us along towards understanding what's wrong with the view of reasoning I started the course with. Reasoning is going from premises to conclusions. And I say, no, that's not reasoning at all. So let's take a little puzzle. Are you up to it? Are you awake? Okay. Now, my little puzzle is very simple. You take a circle, and you draw two perpendicular diameters through the center. Okay. And then you pick a point P on the circumference. You draw a line PR perpendicular to that diameter. PS. Yes. Many of you are unhappy with this. God, this is geometry. I thought I got away from that in grade 10. Okay. And I join R and S. And the next stage is interesting. The next stage is I raise the question, what's the connection between RS and the radius OW? Okay, I use the phrase I raise the question. And I put in the word maybe. Did I raise the question? What does it mean to raise a question? It means that I make a noise and draw diagrams and you become interested. Does that make sense? I'm not raising a question at all if I don't raise a question. Where can the question be raised? Yeah? Are there any questions in this room or in the room at home? And you have to be honest with yourself. Maybe you have been so educated that, oh hell, I'll wait for the answer. That's not my question. And it's not interesting. So raising a question means, yeah, what is the connection? That's why I appeal to, say, good detective yarns in the book. Because I think they raise the question. I can't see anyone here not being interested in whodunit as you read through Agatha Christie, yeah? But maybe I'm totally optimistic about this. Maybe there are people who just plow on. Oh yeah, oh he did it, oh yeah. What do you read for at all, eh? Okay, so I raise the question. What are we looking for? We're looking for a connection, fair enough? It's the same with the ABC puzzle. Always this what question looks for a connection. And the connection isn't on the blackboard. The reason that you took time, a lot of you, to get the ABC puzzle was that It's not there. Where's the answer? The answer is a creation of yours. This is a personal jump. There's no way in which this can come out mechanically. So raising the question, what are you looking for? A connection between RS and OW. Okay, now I'm drawing it this way to bring out a point regarding premises and conclusions. The other view of reasoning says reasoning is from premises to conclusions. Now, we don't have a conclusion, we have a question mark. Okay? What does reasoning do? Reasoning makes a jump, and then you can put in the premises. Does that make some sense? Yeah? Now, what can I do to help? And this is true whether I'm preaching a homily, a sermon, teaching mathematics, teaching sociology, or doing this puzzle. I've got to shuffle things around so that, yeah. I don't know how many of you took the ABC thing and turned it upside down. It's a great help, because then you stop thinking of the letters. You're thinking of shapes. Okay, how can I help? Well, I'm not sure does this help. Sometimes I'm never sure, you know, how much geometry there is around. But I think it might be a help for some of you if I connected that line to that. Okay? I join O and P. Now, if I had colored chalk, I'd color OP red. And then I'd color OW red. And I'd look desperately at the class. And then I'd move OP down. And, okay? And something would happen. Next, I would pick up, say, green chalk, and I'd color that green. And I'd color that green. And I'd look expectantly at the class. And I would hope that, yeah. Anything happen? There's a jump. And the jump is, and you may not be too clear on it, but the jump is a suspicion. Golly, they're equal. Okay? Now notice what we're doing. You actually jump to a conclusion. Yeah, I see some of you working it out. That's terrific. You jump to the conclusion, and then somebody says why, and then you can put in what is called the deduction. You put in what's called the premises. How? Well, RS is equal to OP, because they're diagonals in a rectangle. OP is equal to OW, because they're both radii, same length. Therefore, RS is equal to OW. But you didn't get it this way. Does that make sense? You got it with the jump. Human beings do not work this way. The textbooks for some hundreds of years keep telling us we do, but we don't. I mentioned last week the question of feminine intuition as opposed to logic. But intuition isn't feminine. It's just rare. And logic is not the way we think. Okay, so that's jumping to conclusions. Now, I'll illustrate it. I won't bother on this level, but I'll move on to illustrate it in my next instance of Emma. I've got 6 instances of Emma. Whether we'll get to them all, I don't know. Emma in the kitchen. And again, I'm not sure of what your experience is of being in the kitchen. I met a student here in my first few years who couldn't make tea. That was something, eh? So, okay, Emma in the kitchen, or even prior to getting to the kitchen. Envisage, say, one of you out there deciding that this was a great class. I think we'll have a dinner we'll invite everyone out to Truro, Muscadabbit, where, are you listening? Okay, so you commit yourself. Yes, the date is fixed for the dinner. It's April the 1st. Well, no, we have a class on April the 1st. Better make it April the 3rd, Friday. Okay. You never know. We may get lucky, get an invitation out of this. Okay, dinner. We're having a dinner. Okay, the question comes up, what to do? Now, we're trying to identify elements in us when we're acting. And there's a sense in which, I mean, heavens, isn't he talking about the obvious? Many of you think this is obvious. Yeah? Isn't it sort of obvious that, yeah, you're going to have a dinner for Philosophy 205 on April the 3rd? Well, you've got to ask the question, what am I going to do? And depending on your temperament, you've got to think concretely. You can have a great time without cooking anything. Many of you are like that. You settle down with a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or rum, and you puzzle. I might have, well, say chicken Kiev, followed by bomb Alaska, and then, say, Stilton, a good bowl of Stilton with a 5-star port. How are we doing? Okay, you envisage possibilities, and it's terrific. You can be very creative. And you can jump to conclusions. And when you've done that, you still have to go ahead and work out something like this. Otherwise, you'll make a mess of it. Isn't that fair enough? You're going to have, say, beef Wellington and roast potatoes. Then you'll have to prepare the beef Wellington, prepare the roast potatoes, whether you're peeling them and oiling them or not. They need to be in the oven an hour before the beef Wellington is cooked, etc. So you have to have a logic. Yeah? So you work from your conclusion to build up the strategy, the space-time. Yeah? Does that make sense? Yeah? Some people are not very creative cooks, and they just stick to the recipe. Many of you are like that. I could never use a recipe. I like to muck around. And when I'm mucking around with something, I always make sure I've got curry powder. Because if you really make a mess of it, it's the great disguise, yeah? This isn't going too well. Okay. I think of, say, the Julia Child. I used to watch her on MPBN. And she's a tremendously creative cook. And it would be terrible to try and take down a recipe because she'd say, well, a little spoon of this white wine will do now. And then, of course, you have them sort of slap happy, but tremendously creative. When you're not creative, you tend to fall back on a list. Okay? But the main thing I'm bringing out here is that, yeah, you have creative jumps, and you have to line up, say, that the recipe or the achievement. You made a great dinner, and somebody says, how did you do it? And you probably say, I don't know. Okay, so again, we're bringing out the fact that you work through these levels, whether you're cooking, and that's a slow business, or whether you're doing something instantaneously, like rescuing Emma on the beach. Now, when you do it slowly, what you in fact do is you do this quickly all the time. A little later, we'll talk about a conversation. Molly and Polly, or Emma and her husband Charles, or you and your partner, or Jack and Jill, and we'll find, yeah, you're flipping through this each in turn all the time. But this is the key the key piece of our course for the first 3 lectures. The invitation for you to notice this happening in you both quickly and slowly. Does that make some sense? Yeah? And not to agree with me. You have to pause and ask, who am me? Is this the way that you go about cooking, talking? And my claim is, yes, this is the way. And you have 13 steps. And as you notice, I can mark them. You have 5 levels of consciousness. You've got sensibility, whatting, ising, what to doing, and am I to do? Okay? How far have we got? And this is worth thinking about. Suppose we were doing music instead of meaning. Music instead of me. We had begun music 3 weeks ago. How many of you have studied music at some stage? Didn't you all learn the ukulele in school? Yeah. How far would you be in 3 weeks? You might have identified, and notice I like this parallel, I'm identifying 13 elements. You might have identified the 13 notes from middle C to high C. Okay? There are 13 notes. You've got C, D, E, F, A, B, C, and then you've got the 5 black notes. C sharp, D sharp, F sharp, G sharp, and A sharp. Okay? You might have identified them. How many of you have taken voice and ear tests? And the teacher plays 2 notes and you don't know what it is. You don't know whether it's a semitone or a tone. How many of you have done that? Yeah? And you know, after a couple of weeks, you're in no position to identify an interval like la, dee, which is sort of C to A. Okay? I'm trying to encourage you that we're not rushing through this. We're simply identifying initially these elements in ourselves. Now, everyone accepts these 13 notes. There are a lot more notes in between, of course. The first note vibrates, low C vibrates 256 per second, and high C is 512. And you can have any vibrations in between that, as anyone who knows Arabic or Indian music knows it. There are a lot more sounds between C and C. But, okay, you can identify the 13. Now, this is not part of our culture. Okay, so we're doing something very strange. This is obvious in a certain sense. And there's a sense in which it can't be obvious. Nobody's talking about it. Okay? Any, yeah?
You say it's not part of our culture.
Oh, okay, no, yeah. Push me on that. It's not part of our culture in the sense of when people talk about mind, they do not mean the 13 elements of minding. What do they mean? We will talk under point 2 about some of the notions of mind. Now, in our culture, there are minds. On page 232 of the book, I talk, GK, I end the epilogue with a quote from Chesterton. Lots of people are interested in what happens to the human soul in the next life. I'm interested in what has happened to the human mind in this life. The mind is not studied in this way. What is mind? That's our question, reasoning. Now, that study is not central to our culture. Socrates suggested that it should be a little while back, but it's not. Now, okay, so it's not part of our culture as a study, but it's there. We all do this. I think that's your troubling distinction. Yeah, it is part of our culture. We all do this. We do it very well before we go to school. But it is not understood this way by educationalists, philosophers, theologians. One zone I didn't want to get sort of sidetracked into, but if you take the text of 1 Corinthians 2:16, Paul is referring back to Isaiah 40, and he talks about it in Romans as well. And the question he raises there is, who knows the mind of the Lord? That's in Isaiah. And we have the mind of Christ, he talks about. Okay? Okay, let that mind be in you which was in Christ Jesus. Okay, but well, what is this thing? Is that, yeah? What's a mind? That's what we're asking. And what is it to mind? Minding Emma on the beach, minding the dinner. So, on the one hand, it is present insofar as human beings are present. All of us do this. When I was writing the titles down here, I mentioned Hebrew. The Hebrew word for what is ma. In any language under the sun, and there are even, say, in the Australian Aboriginal group, there are hundreds of languages. But they all have words for this activity. But when you read books about mind, I'll give you a reference to one immediately, Gilbert Ryle, The Concept of Mind, you'll find that there's no discussion whatsoever of these elements. Gilbert Ryle had a mind. How did Gilbert Ryle's mind work? Like that. What about the mind he wrote about? In the book I quote Bernard Lonergan on David Hume. David Hume wrote a huge book. He's a famous British philosopher. Wrote a huge book about human mind, the human mind, human understanding. And I recall, it's in the Wealth of Self, around page 350, he says, methinks we have spent too little time on that human attribute called curiosity. Methinks too. What does Hume say in that big book? He says that mind, what does mind do? It patches together sensations. It sort of sticks them together. It's 400 odd pages, 500 odd pages, and there's nothing about this in it. Does this bring out the contrast? It's absent as a topic in the culture. Yeah? I end the book Wealth, and it's at the beginning of Process, with a poem by Paddy Kavanagh, every man completely blind to the truth about his mind. Does that make sense? And again, I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to say, go to the library, get out a book on mind. I looked up a book last week on faith by an eminent theologian, and he talks about knowledge and then belief. What does he mean by knowledge? He doesn't know. What does he do normally? He does this. Any comment on that? This is a very strange situation. It's described by Bernard Lonergan as truncated subjectivity. He says the neglected subject does, it's page 73 in a book called A Second Collection. The neglected subject does not know himself or herself. The truncated subject not only doesn't know themselves, but doesn't know there's anything there to know. So you have, say, a cognitive psychology, and what is cognition? Whew. Well, the rats do it. I read a book recently, and it was on the child's mind, And at the end of about 5 chapters, there was a summary, which they do in a lot of these texts. And in the summary, it said, in sum, the child's mind, the preschool child's mind does not differ essentially from the rat's. Does that open up the topic that this is not an interest in the culture? So we all have this, and I'm not inviting you to criticize the culture, but to find out, yeah, this is me, this was me. I used to be a very interested little girl, little boy. What am I now? Well, I'm a talking animal. Okay, and you need a sense of humor to survive this. Yeah? Okay, so it's not an interest in the culture, and we're not handling that larger issue, but trying to notice me, the way that I am, the way that I'm me. And this is a scientific pursuit, okay? And I want to spell it out in a diagram a little later. I can see I'm not going to get through all the Emma in the various zones, but perhaps you'll do the exercises. I wanted to go on to Emma training the champ, okay? The coach for, say, Navratilova. She's not sort of the top floor now, but she was for a decade. What is it to coach? It's to get the insights. It's like recipe, yeah? And to formulate and to think out and to be alert. Now, okay, so the coach coaching Emma, but Emma has to play. Many of you watch tennis or play tennis, yeah? Tennis isn't a big thing in Canada, is it? No? Nobody here following the Australian Open. Okay, if you take, say, in the Australian Open, Gabriella Sabatini, she's doing very well. She is using this magnificently all the time. Yeah? A return of serve. The ball comes over. Sensibility. Now, what you have to think out is that this is incredible. I can't believe this. Okay? I'm pushing you. No way does this tennis player do all that. Can you imagine, say, famous Jimmy Connors was famous for return of serve, and let's say Yvonne Lendl is up there serving, okay, and Connors is poised on the baseline. You know what a tennis court is, do you? Am I in the right culture? Beam me up, O'Brien. Okay, and he's waiting. Well, it sounds crazy, doesn't it, to think that Jimmy's there and I see the ball. What is it? It is the ball, and it's coming down the baseline, and it's coming down on this side. What am I going to do? I'm going to hit it. Now, I'm claiming that Jimmy Connors does that, and you have to oppose me. One of the reasons it's not something acceptable in the culture is because it's so daft that we really do all this so swiftly. I'm tempted to tell my favorite joke. Did I tell you the one about the fellow who was looking for a lift at the airport, and this girl swung past in a very speedy little car and picked him up and drove into town, and she started cutting through all the red lights, all the way through Bedford and down the highway, and got through the red lights down on Bayview and on down. And when they got to North Street, it was green, and she pulled up. And, oh yeah, earlier he said, well, why are you doing this? She said, my brother told me this is the quickest way to get through town. Go through all the red lights. So she pulled up at the green light in North Street, and the fellow said, what's wrong now? Oh, she said, my brother might be coming the other way. I mugged that one up, didn't I? Yes. Okay, let's say you go through a red light and the policeman stops you. And you say, sorry, officer, I wasn't thinking. What will the officer say? You should have been. My claim is that you do that spontaneously as you drive, and the really good driver is the person who can switch at a corner, at any problem. And yeah, you're doing this very well. You think of a racing driver, well, that's another ballpark entirely. So you have to test this out in different areas. As I say, I was going to take training the champion, managing the economy, managing education, whether you're a teacher or a school manager. You do this, and the real crisis comes into you when you realize you're doing this, and the people in the classes are meant to do this. And are you cultivating these people? I talked about raising questions earlier. Raising questions in class. Think of the fact that when you're raising children, you're raising questions. Isn't that a marvelous notion? Little faces looking up, holding wonder like a cup. Yeah? And then they get to grade 11 and 12 and they're just about dead. So you see the contrast here, the culture? And then you get to the field of religion and you get people talking about the mind of Christ, yeah? Without knowing what a mind is. You say you get in a sitter at home, and okay, they're a babysitter, and they sort of know what a baby is. But say the person said, well, what I want you to mind tonight, especially, are my GNUs. I better spell that for you. All right, that's an N. My GNUs. You're to mind my GNUs. Yeah? Well, wouldn't you be inclined to say, well, of course I will, but what's a GNU? Yeah? Isn't that a spontaneous question? So, minding children, what's a child? When we get back into the second session, I'll talk about what a GNU is in relation to nodding. But our problem is that we have minds, and oddly, in our Western tradition, we haven't seriously asked, what is this that makes us human? We are minders. And my suggestion is that it's these 13 steps. We are whaters and isers. And when we come back, I'll talk about nodding. We nod. But what is it to nod? Okay?